How's it going, investors? I'm Ari Gutman if you're new here, but either which way, in today's video, I wanted to actually pump the brakes on talking about which individual dividend stocks you should be thinking about buying right now and actually get back to some of the basics with all of you. Now, we're going to get back to those basics by exploring 6 monthly dividend ETFs. That's right, talking about exchange-traded funds that are going to pay you dividends, not on a quarterly basis, but every single month. But I also want you to take note that these 6 ETFs are just some of the monthly paying ETFs that have high dividend yields, so you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of all of them, which is to say that I highly encourage each and every one of you to please always do your due diligence and research before just loading up on any of these ETFs, and then of course leave your thoughts down in a comment below as we go to shed light on your experience with each of these ETFs. But without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, before we actually uncover these ETFs, I wanted to share the rationale as to why I even created a video like this one. And it really all comes down to what I like to call building an investment foundation, a strong one at best, which leads us directly to ETFs because exchange-traded funds allow investors to invest into a basket of stocks as opposed to making the sole attempt to pick the needle, or in our case, the winning stock, in the haystack, or rather the broader market. Because let's face it, whether you're a beginner investor or more experienced, no one bats 100 in this game of investing. And any experienced investor, from Warren Buffett to Charlie Munger or Peter Lynch to John Bogle, would disagree. But with an exchange-traded fund, whether the market experiences the quakes and shakes that it has been more recently, or even finds itself in a bull market, ETFs will ensure that you're not going to lose because you're essentially invested in the whole market. So you can't lose. Now, for each of these ETFs, I'm simply pulling information from the respective brokerage sites, so feel free to navigate over to each site as I go through each of these ETFs. But let's not waste any more time here and get started with the Wisdom Tree US High Dividend Fund, ticker symbol DHS. This ETF seeks to track the investment results of high dividend yielding companies solely within the US stock market, which ultimately means you no longer need to spend countless hours sifting through dividend stocks with high dividend yields, because this one particular ETF does all of that work for you, meaning every share owned worth of DHS, you're simply bagging 381 stocks deemed to the highest paying dividend stocks within the US stock market, with stocks like ExxonMobil, AbbVie, Chevron, Philip Morris, and Cisco being the top 5 largest holdings within the fund. And just based on the fact that this fund holds some of the most dominant dividend leaders, it means its performance is right on par as well. You see, over the last 10 years, DHS has average returns of 7.95%, just above the average overall returns if you would have bet on the entire market. Which means if you would have invested $10,000 10 years ago, you'd now be sitting on roughly $19,752 today. That's almost in the brink of doubling your principal. And what's more is the fund's dividend yield coming in at 5.12%, which makes DHS a sound dividend ETF if you're looking for a safe bet to outbeat inflation while also enjoying overall growth. Now, on the other hand, you may be out there thinking, well, why go with an ETF like DHS when I could have invested into, say, a Realty Income where the yield is above 6%, or even a Philip Morris where the yield is above 5%. But here's the thing. The growth of both of those stocks has been quite lackluster in comparison to DHS, which makes for the case for why you should definitely be considering ETFs in the first place to essentially avoid all value or the bait and switch dividend traps that are out there. Now, of course, investing into such a basket of stocks does come at a cost, but certainly not an astronomical one, with an expense ratio only at 0.38%, which equates to $38 per year per $10,000 invested, all making DHS quite a sound ETF that's worth your consideration. But that's only one out of the 6 ETFs on the list, so let's now jump to our next monthly paying dividend ETF. We have the Invesco S&P 500 Dividend Low Volatility ETF, ticker symbol SPHD, which measures the performance of 50 of the least volatile high dividend yielding stocks in the S&P 500. Now, this ETF was essentially created as a benchmark for investors who were essentially looking to invest safely while simultaneously securing plenty of income month over month as the ETF appreciates, which means that it is just another reliable choice for your dividend income portfolio, especially as it currently holds 51 stocks within the fund, with its holdings ranging from AT&T to Verizon, Altria Group, OneOak, and Kinder Morgan as the top 5 holdings. And just so now we can all understand the dominance of this ETF, if we went back 10 years ago to invest $10,000 into the fund, we would now be sitting on $21,443. That's a notch better than our last ETF, as SCHD averaged about 8.27% worth of growth year over year. Now, in addition to this ETF's appreciation over time, this ETF will also be shelling out dividends, with its dividend yield currently sitting at 5.36%, and with an expense ratio coming in at only 0.3%, which equates to about $30 annually per $10,000 invested. SCHD may be a better buy than DHS, but keep in mind, we've only covered 2 out of the 6 monthly dividend ETFs, so we have plenty more excitement ahead of us. However, I do want to take a moment here to check in with all of you and ask if this content is what you're looking for and enjoying. Now, if that's the case, simply tap on that thumbs up button to let me know. I'll keep creating content just like this. With that, let's get back to it with the iShares Preferred and Income Securities ETF, ticker symbol PFF. Now, this particular ETF primarily tracks the investment results of an index that's composed of the US dollar-denominated preferred and hybrid securities. Or in other words, in everyday language, it grants exposure to US stocks, which have characteristics of bonds, meaning this particular ETF has safety written all over it. Now, glancing into the fund's 454 holdings, we can see plenty of financial institution ties that make up the top 5 holdings, with its links to Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Bank of America, or JP Morgan. But now, with such a specific focus, it certainly hinders the ability for the fund to perform over the long period of time in certain economic environments. Therefore, the hypothetical growth of $10,000 invested 10 years ago only comes out to about $16,191. That's only 3.48% on average per year. Yet the fund does shell out a solid dividend, coming in at 6.81%, but it also then is going to go ahead and hit you with a higher expense ratio, coming in at 0.46%, which is only $46 per $10,000 invested, but I'd encourage a lot more due diligence on this particular fund before getting invested into it, and really question whether it's perfect or ideal for your investment portfolio. Next up, we have a more recent dividend investor craved monthly paying ETF, the JP Morgan Equity Premium Income ETF, ticker symbol JEPI, which was only established back in 2020 after a portfolio managers over at JP Morgan with decades worth of experience came together to construct a fund that takes a nuanced approach to covered calls that delivers high income and reduces downside risk. Now that is a winning dividend ETF. Now, what's really something out of this world about JEPI is the fact that since inception, it has truly been a home run hit. As we could see, $10,000 invested back in 2020 would have delivered a 44% return, driving your principal up to roughly $14,426. And that's despite all the market volatility that we've seen over the last handful of years, as it's comprised of 134 holdings to date, with some of the top holdings being Progressive, Microsoft, Adobe, Amazon, and MasterCard, all leaders of their industries. But now here's where we're going to get to discussing the dividend income that you can get from JEPI, because it really gets exciting with this particular ETF. It's got a dividend yield coming in at 7.9%, while maintaining a lower expense ratio for a high dividend yield coming in at just 0.35%, which equates to only $35 per $10,000 invested per year. And while we're already discussing a JP Morgan fund, we might as well also mention JEPI's tech twin, the JP Morgan Nasdaq Equity Premium Income ETF, ticker symbol JEPQ, which provides investors with a very attractive income ETF. Ultimately, it's like JEPI, but JEPQ's strategy benefits from an experienced options manager and thoughtful implementation, but the downside risk and opportunity costs weigh heavily on this fund depending on the economic environment. So let that just be a fair warning for you all. It is tech heavy. However, with its top holdings being Microsoft, Apple, and Google, followed by Amazon and Nvidia, along with 84 other holdings within the Nasdaq, JEPQ does in fact drive a heck of a lot of profits towards any monthly dividend seeker. As we can see, a $10,000 investment since the fund's inception back in 2022 would have yielded approximately a 10% return here, totaling out to nearly $11,000. And with technology being our future, I would say that this fund is going to be tested over time, but will likely continue to shine. Now, as for its dividend, check this out. JEPQ has a dividend yield at 11.68%. That is captivating a lot of dividend investors. And it's got that same expense ratio at 0.35%. That's just $35 per $10,000 invested per year. But if none of those monthly paying dividend ETFs captured your attention thus far or sold you on an investment into them, then I'm going to leave you with the Invesco KBW High Dividend Yield Financial ETF, ticker symbol KBWD, which is a fund that generally invests about 90% of its assets in the securities of publicly listed financial companies that have competitive dividend yields. So in other words, we're talking about 40 total holdings, with Armor Residential, Orchard Island Capital, FSKKR Capital, Ellington Financial, and Trinity Capital comprising of the fund's largest holdings, which have allowed for KBWD to drive over 6.04% returns on average to shareholders year over year, which totals out to $15,088 on a $10,000 investment about 10 years ago, while also gifting investors with a whopping 13.53% dividend yield. Now, here is where the major drawback to investing into KBWD comes in. And while I actually would then recommend not investing into it, this expense ratio is coming in at 3.84%. That's a hefty sum, equating to a few $100s, which I don't think is really worth it if you're going to invest into an ETF. Those are just my thoughts on this particular ETF. Now, all in all, go ahead, leave a comment down below. And if you found this video to be insightful, I can certainly guarantee you're going to love this one right here. Give it a click, but before you do, subscribe to never miss a single dividend stock idea.